Alright, so we have a really amazing range of authors here for the LitRPG panel today. LitRPG is a new genre that has kind of just sprung out of nowhere and done really, really well on Amazon. We don't even have a dedicated category on Amazon yet, and there's a number of LitRPG titles that are in like the top, 50 to 500 books on Amazon. So we have, in order, we have Matt Dinniman, who is a long-standing member of the LitRPG community and has been running for many years. We have James Hunter, Dakota Krout, who are two of probably the most successful LitRPG authors in the market right now. And we have Ramon, who is a podcaster and reviewer and has been a really integral part of the LitRPG community pretty much since it came to America and became like a big phenomenon in America. So I'm going to hand it over to them and let them sort of talk about...
I think you should introduce yourself.
Oh, me as well. I guess. So I'm James, Baldwin. I also write LitRPG. And I came in probably, 2 years ago now with a series that has continuously done pretty well. I will, like I said, hand it over to you guys and start asking you questions because it's not about me. So LitRPG, as I mentioned, is a pretty new genre in the English-speaking world. It's been pretty popular in Asia and Russia especially for many years. So if, with you guys going on the table, how would you describe LitRPG to someone who's never heard about it before?
He should start.
Hey everybody, I'm Ramon from the LitRPG podcast. I've written and reviewed over 900 LitRPG titles in the last couple of years. We're in episode 200 this week of the show, where I just review a LitRPG novel specifically, trying to author and do LitRPG news on a weekly basis. I get this question specifically a lot because they're all like, point to the podcast guy. LitRPG, at least for me, is a story that's written in usually science fiction or fantasy. But it is set in a RPG world specifically, and the RPG mechanics that are in that world are not hidden away from the audience. Those are kind of the two big specific differentiators between our genre and fantasy and science fiction. And in story elements, there are a lot of combinations and other similarities, but those are kind of the two big things.
I describe LitRPG and GameLit as a epic fantasy with a sci-fi twist. It's essentially a fantasy story or sci-fi story that is constrained by the bounds of a video game or a system that allows you to quantify every aspect of your character and what they can do.
Yeah, I think initially when a lot of people hear about LitRPG, they immediately jump to like Ready Player One because it happens in the game world, and a lot of LitRPGs do take place in actual video games, right? So it's kind of this portal fiction element, but a lot of them don't. And so I think a lot of people get caught up that it needs to take place in an actual video game-like setting, but some of the most popular best-selling LitRPG series that are out there don't take place. Dakota's Divine Dungeon series, which is arguably one of the most best-selling series that are out there, is not in a video game world at all. But it has sort of these game-like elements of character progression, of leveling up, of very, I would say, hard magic systems, where it's very clear that they can sort of progress and gain these new powers. And I think that that's the thing that's most appealing to LitRPG readers and game-like readers, is the idea that there's sort of this tangible way to track power and track progression and to track character agency through the story. So those are sort of the big indicators, I think. They can take place in a video game, but they can also take place on a space station or in a hostile planet, and it can be futuristic Marines that have been gamified, and they have nanites in their blood that allows them to level up. There's so many different ways that you can run with that, as long as you have those sort of pinpoints of gamification and character progression. Those are the big elements for me.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything everyone said. Ramon down there, he has his website, the LitRPG podcast, and if you go on there, he has it broken down pretty well, pretty much every LitRPG book that's out there. So I would recommend everybody go to his website and look at all the different categories of game lit. For me personally, I prefer the ones that are set in actual video games. That's just who I am, but there's other people who absolutely refuse to read books. So just like romance, and then you start to get crazy subgenres. And we are all under the game lit category.
Yeah, I would add to that LitRPG is really just starting to branch out heavily into subgenres. When we were first writing, even like just a couple of years ago, there was pretty much a preponderance of like sort of post-apocalyptic, portal fantasy, and video game settings, and now you've got all kinds of subgenres like dungeon core and all these different like variations on the LitRPG theme. So sort of moving into that, like what got you into LitRPG? What is it about this genre that really catches you, both as like an artist writing it and as a reader, and as someone interacting with readers of this genre? What is it that does it for you with LitRPG?
Well, I started reading when I was a little kid. I read like Tad Williams' 120Books, and then the Choose Your Own Adventures, and everybody that's here is probably into video games. And I played an unhealthy amount of video games my whole life. And then one day I was just reading around books and I saw, I don't know how to pronounce his name, he was supposed to be here, Vasily. He's a Russian RPG author who translated it in English, and I found his book on Hoopla, I think, and I just devoured it. And it's about a guy that's stuck in a video game. And I had an idea for a book that was similar, and I just started writing it before I even knew what the term LitRPG was. And then as I was writing the book, I saw all these other books coming out that are in a similar genre, and I was like, oh my gosh, I found my tribe, The cool thing about this genre is there are so many people coming to it who aren't readers. They weren't readers before. They play video games, they read comic books, and then suddenly they discover something that speaks to them, and it's unique, I think, in that genre, and it spoke to me too.
So pass it down.
So I had been writing professionally in urban fantasy when I had stumbled upon LitRPG. My wife and I were living in Bangkok at the time, and and the interesting thing about Thailand is it's partially restricted country, so a lot of the things that I could do here in the States I couldn't do there. There was Netflix for me to watch, or Amazon Prime. I couldn't play video games, and so I had sort of this like void, black hole of entertainment, which is why I started writing in the first place. And I published a couple of urban fantasy books, and I also, Vasily was my entry point into LitRPG. I read Way of the Shaman. And I remember stumbling across it on Amazon. I was like, what is this? And then I read the first book, and I was like, I still don't know what this is, but also I am strangely attracted to it. Very complicated feelings here. And I remember like powering through that series, and there wasn't a lot of LitRPG out at the time. And I had read through Awaken Online, I think was my second big series after some of the Russian stuff. That was my first American RPG series. And I'd always wanted to write high fantasy, but at the time I was still a fairly new writer, and I thought that I wasn't a good enough writer to write the high fantasy story that I wanted. But LitRPG was kind of this perfect thing, because it was like, wow, this is a thing that I already love, video games was the thing that I've always wanted to do, high fantasy. But it allows me to sort of cut some of the corners, because one of the things that I was always afraid with high fantasy was you have to do a lot of research, you have to know a lot of stuff, getting rid of all of your slang. But this gave me the perfect opportunity to have this sort of transported to another world aspect while also drawing on something that I deeply enjoyed. And as an adult, I really enjoyed the LitRPG because I'm a parent, right? When I was in my 20s, I could spend all night playing a WoW campaign or playing Skyrim or Diablo, and it didn't matter. And I could spend 30 hours playing a game a week, and it was not a big deal. But as a parent with children, you can't do that. That's not a thing that's sort of realistic. And so and LitRPG was so deeply appealing to me, because it was like, this is the best part of a video game, and I can do all of it in 8 hours. Right, so it sort of hit all of those emotional highs that I got as a video game player playing through a great campaign without actually having to spend the time playing through a great campaign. And so I think that's the reason why it resonated so strongly with me. And so I was like, man, this was before I realized how big the market was. I thought, I'm just gonna write one book and see how that does. And that changed my writing career. And I much more heavily leaned toward LitRPG. I still write urban fantasy, but I really enjoy LitRPG, and it's just a heck of a fun thing to write, so that's me.
So for me, basically kind of a condensed version of that. So what I was looking for was, as a guy who had a job, who was married, who was going to school, I was looking for a way to get my fix of video games in a short amount of time, because I only had a short amount of time. And I said, since I want this, there's got to be other people that want this. So, I mean, that's my audience now is people who are wanting to have that escapism, that fantasy life, that 300 hours of World of Warcraft, and they, instead of having that or having to do that, take that amount of time, they still get that same experience in a much shorter and more, hopefully, fulfilling amount of time.
Yeah, and for me, as I come from a huge fan base of LitRPG, and I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that all their stories were very similar, that they were fans first, and then they became writers out of this huge passion for something that resonated with them. And I've interviewed dozens of LitRPG authors, some of the best in the genre, and that's a very common part of their origin story, that they love video games. They come from a gamer culture, and they just love the genre so much that they have stories just percolating in their minds, and they had to put it on page, and they had to set up. Amazon's a great way to publish. Like I said, publishing. If somebody likes it, great. If they don't, it was a fun project, and they did really well because their stories resonated with this larger gaming culture of like people who grew up as gamers, and just we became adults, and we didn't have as much time to game, and so we get that same kind of like little dopamine fix from reading these stories, because we go on these great adventures and we go to worlds that we would love to actually travel in as gamers, and that inspired myself to start writing in the genre. I was a podcaster. I've been doing the LitRPG podcast for well over a year, and I was just full of story ideas, and I just fingered a keyboard, and eventually a year later published my first book under the pen name R&E, and it was an Amazon top 100 bestseller. Not because I'm a good writer, because I'm not. I'm an okay writer. I wasn't trained as a writer, and I never thought I'd write anything in my entire life. I came from an engineering background, math and science, right? Not writing. But because the story just resonated with readers who love gaming, who love RPG mechanics, who love the story, who love the progression, it did well. And that's how I became not just a podcaster and a fan, but also an actual successful writer in the genre.
Yeah, and I would say that that's a very common story among like a broad sample of LitRPG authors, is that they start out as fans. So like for me, I'm the only child of a single parent. I spent all my young youth playing video games, trying to find things to do, because I had no siblings to distract me. So, I came from that game background and also an anime fan background. I ran an anime club at my university, and we had sessions every week. So those, that fan base and that like general sort of culture is a huge part of like my own life. And then, I had been writing these stories just as like, little personal short stories, and then realized, wait, people want to read this stuff. They want to read fantasy and adventure set in virtual realities or set in video games. This is the thing that people are actually looking for. And many of our readers are like us, very much, and the genre alignment with RPG is very much like, if you're not part of that culture, it's very difficult to write this genre, because the kinds of readers you are getting are people like you. They're usually men, some women as well, but predominantly men, who used to game a lot and now have kids or they have jobs and they don't have time to play World of Warcraft anymore, so they write or they read. So as an author in the genre, one of the big draws for me is the transformative aspect of LitRPG in terms of what the characters go through. That character progression is really important. Is that something that you guys have found in your own work?
The question is character progression important to your story and to your works?
Yes.
That's definitely the key element, I think, in all good LitRPG. Not only character progression in terms of storytelling and character growth and emotional growth, but also actual stats. And it's one of the things that can differentiate LitRPG from fantasy or science fiction, is that there's actual quantifiable progression in growth and power. You go from level 1 to level 10, your stats increase, you get better weapons, you get more challenging enemies, and there's actual visible numbers or information in there in the story that says this character is getting better and stronger, and that appeals to number nerds like me who love that kind of stuff.
Yes, I think that the numbers are very important for multiple reasons, but one of those is that as an author, it helps to mitigate power creep. So, one of the issues with Superman is that you either need a bigger, more powerful enemy, and then what's the point of being Superman? Or it's just the emotional turmoil. And so if you can mitigate some of that by having your character go up and face challenges that they are ready for or not quite ready for, and then they can get benefits based on that, just being able to show that and have a good reason for why things are happening can really keep the attention on your story.
I think the reason why so many readers, because you're right, it's a fundamental part of most LitRPG and game-led stories is the character progression. I would argue that if you don't have that, you don't probably have a game-led story or LitRPG story at all. And I think the reason why it's so important to people, aside from the actual game elements, is because a lot of readers today, I think a lot of my readers feel powerless in their lives. They feel like they're doing a lot of things and getting nowhere. And so I think for a lot of readers, the idea that they can escape into this place where all of their actions have a tangible, visible consequence. I do this thing, I get this reward. I do this thing, I have more agency. I do this thing, I get more powerful. And so I think that in a culture, especially for millennials, sort of my age group, who feel very disillusioned, like, hey, we put in our time and we don't get what we feel like we deserve, they get to read these stories where characters have power. They have agency to affect and change the world, and they can sort of track that. And I think that is deeply appealing to a lot of readers. I think as a storyteller, it also gives you the ability to do some things in regular fantasy. Sometimes it can be hard to sort of forecast exactly how difficult the thing is going to be, what a big challenge this is going to be, how bad this bad guy really is. But in LitRPG, we kind of get a shortcut because we can say, oh, this guy is objectively much more powerful than our characters are. And so if they're going to win the day, we're going to have to come up with some clever solutions. And so it kind of gives us a shorthand way of contrasting our antagonists and our protagonists to set the stakes and even make the stakes much higher by sort of using those visible numbers to tell the story. So I think that once you sort of dig into LitRPG, you find that there's a lot of things that you can do in LitRPG that you literally can't do in another story because of those game-like elements and the character progression. So that's one of the things I find really enjoyable about telling LitRPG stories.
In the end, these are still stories. They're still books. They still need a beginning, a middle, and end. They still need conflict. And even though I was a fan of the genre, I come from more of a literary background. I went to college and did the creative writing stuff. But, and honestly, there is a lot of that in this genre that I find very unappealing, where it's a book where it looks like, it reads like someone's playing a video game. I can just watch Twitch if I wanted to do that. And if it doesn't have characters in it, if it's not a human story with conflict where a person's actually dealing with some sort of turmoil, then I don't feel as if it's a real story. And so, yes, it's important for there to be characters. It's important for there to be a story there. And there's a lot of challenges with LitRPG, especially like the games, the books I like, where it's a person stuck in a game. And there's two stories going on. There's the outside world, and then there's the game story. And those can be two completely different things, and how they interact with that person is what I like to read, and it's what I like to write.
So that's very much on the craft side, and now we're going to kind of move to more of the market side of LitRPG. So how do you think the market for LitRPG is shaping up as of 2019 going into 2020? You know, do you think that we've reached a peak in the genre, or do you think that there's much more room for that genre to expand?
Well, I'm probably not the best guy to ask this question, but I published my first LitRPG in the beginning of 2017, and nobody knew who I was. I did no marketing. I got kind of a crappy review from Ramon over there. But my book still went to 301 or 2, I think it was, on the Amazon store right when it came out. And as of now, there are many more people writing lit RPG books just because of, it's what happens. It's became a popular genre. A lot of people are reading it, a lot of people are writing it, and I don't really know where the market is or going, but like a lot of these kind of fad genres, they go like this, and then they go like this, and then I don't think they go all the way back down. They kind of find their own little place, and I suspect we're like a little bit past the moment, are we? But I don't know.
I'm going to be contentious, because I don't think so. I think that LitRPG has a huge amount of room for growth and potential still. I think that there are niche genres. My publishing company also has a sub-branch that publishes harem. And harem is a very niche genre, right? It's very specific. There's a really ravenous audience for it, but it's small, because harem's like kind of one of those things that you're either really into it or you're really not into it. And it's hard to grow that. But LitRPG is sort of this unique situation where it doesn't have to be fantasy, it doesn't have to be sci-fi. It's really, in my mind, it's portal fantasy in one form or another. Instead of going into a wardrobe and ending up in Narnia, you go into a capsule and you end up in an ultra-immersive fantasy video game world or whatever, right? But I think that that's its strength, is that concept is appealing to a lot of people, and it also has a much broader potential base. Because constantly, we can push into epic fantasy, and we can draw in and siphon off new readers from epic fantasy who have never heard about LitRPG before, but they really like epic fantasy, and because we tell really good epic fantasy stories that happen to be the sort of fantasy with a sci-fi twist, people say, oh, that's kind of unique, I never heard about that before, and they'll take a look. So I think that LitRPG has a tremendous amount of growth potential still. I think that we haven't even begun to tap the amount of market share that we could have. I will say for new authors that are looking to get in, it is much harder now to break into the market than it was before. There's a lot more competition. In the early days of LitRPG, you could basically have an unedited story with a hand-drawn cover on lined notebook paper, and you could be okay. You can't do that anymore, because there are a lot of authors that are publishing good stories that are well edited with great covers, and that means that the readers can be more selective about what they want, because there's a dearth of content for them to choose from. So it is harder to break in, but I think that the market share can continue to grow, and I think that if you continue to put in the effort and you continue to work hard and you understand the market and you understand the readers because you're one of them, and you're willing to put out the content, that you can have a very successful career here. I've seen lots of authors, first-time authors, that still, this year, have broken out with top 500 books, first in series, that they've literally never written anything else before. I've looked at a lot of genres, and I can tell you that's not normative for most genres. So I think there's still a lot of room.
Okay, unless you have anything to add. So, in terms of where you guys, so you James and Dakota have recently started publishing companies, and they're actually looking at not just publishing their own books, but publishing new authors and other sort of related genres as well, like potentially cultivation and harem romance as well. Where do you guys see your direction moving forward as publishers in this genre?
So for me, I kind of write So Mountain Press is more focused in on game-led and LitRPG. So we don't do harem stuff. We're more trying to keep the more large audience, like the large chunk that we can get. We try to stay away from certain contentious issues and just have fun with the stories, because what our readership is after is the escapism. And there's a lot in life that people don't want to have to interact with and see. And what we're trying to do is write people in video games. And in video games, you're going along, and I'm not sure about y'all, but I've been pulled along on side quests where I was like, all right, 5 minutes, fine, I'll go and do the side quest. And then I have never completed the main quest in Skyrim, and it's just one of those things. So for me, we're looking for more of LitRPG, more game-lit, and trying to stay very focused on what we're doing so that we can become the best game-lit and LitRPG publishers that we can be. So
I would say that Mountain probably is the premier LitRPG, and we're a publisher, but I would say that they're probably the premier LitRPG publisher because that's what they focus on. We publish a lot of LitRPG. We're publishing more LitRPG at Shadow Alley Press, which is the company that my wife and I, who's back here, run. But we publish a little bit more broadly, but like Dakota, sort of our guiding ethos is that we write books that are fun to read. I also believe that our readers in particular are looking to escape. And so they can be books that are thematically important, but at the end of the day, we're writing Marvel books and not DC books. We want people to walk away having smiled and said, I'm glad that I spent that portion of my life doing that, and not, the world is bleak and nihilistic and we should all die. So that's kind of our guiding ethos. We do write in a number of different genres. We still publish urban fantasy. We have a really big element in LitRPG. We have an imprint called Black Forest Books, which publishes harem titles, and we have a couple of really talented harem authors that write action, adventure, pulpy men's romance harem stuff that's really popular and sells really well, and people are really excited to read those books. We have been looking at some cultivation stuff, which is not LitRPG, but there's a lot of overlap because of the leveling up elements that's seen in some of those books. But we're always looking for new stuff, but we're pretty firmly fantasy-oriented books that are fun to read.
Is there a Jan Moran in the room here? Okay, doesn't look. Alright, no worries. Okay, so I'm going to assume that a lot of people who are here watching this are interested in either writing LitRPG or are fans of LitRPG. So going down the table, what would be your two pieces of advice for people who are looking at breaking into this genre and writing their first LitRPG title?
Number one is read other LitRPG titles. And number two is only write in this genre if you love it. They're just like the other genres. There's a lot of people who kind of jump in right to market, people who don't know what they're doing. The readers are very rabid. If you're not a gamer, they'll know and you'll get ripped to shreds. But like James was saying, this is meant to be fun. Have fun with it, write fun stories, but read. That's my biggest advice.
I echo all of that. The only thing that I would add is more on a business side of things, just treat it like a business. And this is general advice for all indie publishers. If you want people to pay you money, you need to treat it like a business. You need to put out a product that's well edited with a good cover. You need to do the work, or you're sort of disrespecting the people that are paying you. So if you're going to do it as a business, treat it like a business, and you're going to be infinitely better off.
Just like anything else, make sure that you're putting out a professional product. So at one point, like they had mentioned, you could put out a cover that was hand-drawn. I've been there. You could put out a book that was unedited. I've been there. But one of the great things about being a self-publisher, indie publisher, is that you can go back and fix that. So now, what we put out is great cover books. We put out stuff that's very well edited. Thank you. And that's a big thing because people, if they have the option to have great covers, great books, really good content, easy to read, or they have something else, they're going to read that first one, right? So, that's my biggest thing is make sure that you're putting out something that you are proud to put your name on as well.
Because I do a LitRPG podcast where I review LitRPG books every single week, sometimes 5 to 10 books a week, I have a laundry list of stuff I could advise on. A whole panel on things you probably should or shouldn't do to craft a good literature. It requires that I stick to 2. So my first would probably be make sure your story is actually LitRPG. Readers will absolutely tell you that if you say you're a LitRPG story and they're expecting a LitRPG story, but they're not getting it. So make sure you know what that genre tropes are, what readers are going to expect, because otherwise they will just give you 1-star reviews. Not saying necessarily your story is bad, but just because it's not what it says it is. Also, if you're going to use numbers in your story, make sure your math is good. Make sure it's accurate, because readers will absolutely double check all your math. They will check your formulas. They will reverse engineer all of the numbers you get just to figure out your game mechanics, because the game mechanics in a good LitRPG story are as interesting and as important as your main character. The game mechanics really become another character for your readers because it's something that they love. It's something that they've experienced as gamers for years. the learning the rules, learning how to min-max, learning how to exploit all their systems that they're playing with, right? Whether it's tabletop or a video game system. So if you're going to use numbers, make sure that they actually make sense and they match.
Yeah, and I would add to that you know, if you're running the RPG, make sure your game system is solid. Like, think about you're building the game system into the story. It shouldn't just be an add-on to the story. It's something that has to be integral to the story. It can't, you know, you can't just have a character sort of half-assing it. They have to be engaged with those mechanics. Those mechanics have to have like real impacts on them. You know, if they don't build their stats properly, then they have to work out, well, I should have put points into strength, and now I have this strength challenge that I can't deal with. What am I going to do? You know, there's got to be emotional and like story impacts that link the characters in the game system, as well as the actual story. And so, you know, those three elements have to be really strongly interlinked. So I think at this point, we can possibly talk about building on that game system idea. You know, are there other options just beyond writing novels? You know, do we, in the future of LitRPG, do we have the potential to talk to video game designers? Do we have the potential to publish our game systems as their own IPs? Is that something that any of you guys are looking into? And if you are, just put up a hand and start talking.
I can't speak personally from this, but I talked to dozens of LitRPG authors, either on Facebook or Twitter, or just doing off interviews. And I know a number of them are actually in talks with tabletop game designers who are converting their actual game systems from the novels into actual tabletop games. I know Michael Jaffa, who's an amazing LitRPG author. He's actually also working on an actual video game as a writer, but as a consultant for the game mechanics side of things, because he's already developed game mechanics for his many series, including Mejia, the 4th round series, at least 10 round series, and other authors like Pacific Inc. have also been in talks with other companies. It's hard to translate LitRPG mechanics into a tabletop or video game system, just because a lot of it is wish fulfillment, and there's sometimes a little fudging of math and like the background spreadsheets, but it is very viable. I've seen very few actual finished products though.
No, I think that was for you. Yeah, that's all right. We've got time. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to come up to the mic once the mic's up there. Is there a mic?
So you guys have mentioned that the LitRPG readers are very particular and hardcore, I guess you'd say. So I was wondering, as a LitRPG writer, what do you think are the primary tropes that your books have to have in order to appease those readers?
It kind of depends on the subgenre of LitRPG. More and more there's fantasy LitRPG, there's science fiction LitRPG, there's survival apocalypse LitRPG, there's dungeon core LitRPG, and so each one of those kind of subgenres has their different trope stuff. For example, dungeon core, you're going to expect a little crystal in the middle of the dungeon who wants to murder the adventurers. They come into his dungeon and he creates traps and creates monsters for them to fight. In apocalypse LitRPG, you're going to have the same thing you have in a zombie apocalypse story, except with RPG mechanics where they level up and have shotguns with specific damage ranges, right? But the same tropes that exist in the apocalypse survival genre also exist there, just with game mechanics now. Same thing with the other kind of genres. In whole, the bigger tropes are going to be that they actually level up, or they have some kind of progression system that's going to feel like it matters to the story. It can't just be like a surface kind of thing. So I said that's probably one of the bigger tropes in all of LitRPG that's going to matter. Their game mechanics exist, they make sense, they make math sense, and they matter as much as physics or magic system to your story.
Right. And you can subvert some of those tropes, but to your point also, yes, readers will burn you in effigy if you get it wrong. There's no more angry readers than LitRPG readers if you mess up, so don't mess up. But I write another series called Rogue Dungeon, which is a dungeon core, but it subverts a lot of those tropes because a lot of the things that you see in most dungeon core is not there. And that's a really popular series that sells really well. So I think that it's okay to subvert tropes, and that's the thing. LitRPG is a new enough genre that nothing's cemented into place. You can do a lot, and you can experiment a lot, and you can write about a story that you want to read think about a game that you would want to play and design something around that. I think the biggest fundamentals that Ramon mentioned are just that the game has to make sense, that you have to have the mechanics in place, that it has to matter in some fundamental way, and you need to follow through on that premise and deliver it to the readers all the way through consistently, otherwise they will get upset.
Thank you.
So if you're looking to research this RPG, right, so I'm not a massive role-playing geek, so I'm more Cthulhu than D&D. But if you're looking to research it and find out, get an understanding of how do you present game mechanics in a book, particularly bearing in mind that you've got to also do audio of it at some point, and somebody's got to listen to that and not go, what on earth am I listening to during this book? What books would you guys recommend that you didn't write yourselves? But people out here who are also, I'm guessing, a lot of role players in this room and video game players. So if you were saying like, try these books, you'll get an understanding of how people do it. And if you're not going to write like this, get out of my genre and go write something else.
Okay. First off, real quick on the audio, I sell more audiobooks than I sell ebooks. Just FYI, audio is huge in this market, and some of the people that are doing audio for LitRPG do a fantastic job. But as to books I recommend, Ramon will have something to say about this, but for Dungeon Core, for example, you might want to read Dakota's book.
And you can't all just, I don't want...
Right. But that book is considered the book to read. There's several different subgenres. Vasily, who is not here, the Way of the Shaman, it's translated from Russian to English, so it's not necessarily the greatest literary masterpiece, but it's a lot of people's jump off point into LitRPG, and then I'll pass this down.
So real quick, I would say, actually, any of the people that are up here, Moderator included, because we're up here for a reason, because we sell a lot of LitRPG books and we're fairly popular. Of people that are not up here, a couple that spring to mind, love them or hate him, Alaron Kong is a really, really popular LitRPG author. His books are phenomenally produced on through Audible with Nick Bedell. So I mean, it's at least giving it a listen. So you have a baseline. I think Travis Bagwell's Awaken Online series, Luke Chinolinko's Ascend, anything by Michael Chatfield, and probably Dave Woolmarth. He's got a lot of really great stuff as well. So those are the ones that immediately spring to my mind.
Yes.
Oh my God, this is so my question. I gotta say, this is literally what the podcast does every single week. Do recommendations and read a bunch of stuff because I'm a huge fan still. I would suggest, this is just in promotion for myself, but LitRPGpodcast.com, there's a recommendation page. I literally have every single review I've ever done, all 900. I rate them on a weekly basis from a score of 1 to 10, 10 being perfect, 1 being total god pile. And I list them back at you. So go to the page, I have all my recommendations there. Quick names, Travis Bagwell, Right to Awaken Online. I like Michael Scotterill. Some of the stuff has been really good for the LitRPG side. Vasily Mihinko, Dan Servanov, there are Russian LitRPG authors. I love Charles Dean, he's a friend of mine, but he's also like an amazing writer. I of course love everybody here whose stuff is here. There's just too many things. Go to the website. There's a lot more.
Okay, I will just back up and say Ramon's website is probably the biggest resource, and most of the RPG authors will tell people wanting to research the genre and reading the genre, go and see what Ramon's done, because he's got this really comprehensive catalogue. But we're going to have to move on.
Thanks, guys. Hello, I have one quick comment. Girls in gaming and girls in the LitRPG, very popular, just so you know. The other thing is, going on what you said, LitRPG versus game lit and the controversy there, what would you prefer? Which one is the proper stacking of the things when you're talking about that?
I think since we're short on time, I think Ramon should answer.
There you go, yeah.
LitRPG is definitely the more popular one specifically. Game lit is easier to write in because it's a much broader category. Yeah, we also have additional 5 minutes beyond that, the timer apparently. So that kind of is a direct answer to your question on the women in LitRPG and gaming. Absolutely true. Almost half of all gamers are women. We have some amazing women writers in LitRPG as well. I have a whole list of them as female writers. I tag them specifically in my reviews and podcast list because there's always people who ask questions where I'm a woman, I'm a gamer, are there other authors or female protagonists, and I have a whole list of that stuff.
Perfect, thank you.
Jay Boyce, you want to say she's an amazing LitRPG author with Mountaindale.
Yeah, and really
She's
what I said
absolutely
before,
pick up her stuff. It's incredible.
with what I said before about the market, I think that the female gamer side of the market is really untapped right now, and that's partly because the genre is so new, and as the genre matures, there's a pretty good likelihood that it's really going to spread out, and there's going to be like much more like female-centric and female gamer-centric stories coming out.
Next question.
So how many, if you're looking at the market of LitRPG, how much of it do you think is video game driven versus tabletop role-playing game driven?
I read so much, I kind of have an answer for this. Video game is probably going to be 60%, because it's just easier for people to kind of quantify in their brains. I'm a gamer. I spent decades gaming, so that's a good jumping off point as an author. But there are also other kinds of that besides tabletop. Tabletop is like a very small portion of the LitRPG background, basically. I can think of essentially 6 different series. I can think of 100 fantasy video game ones, essentially, but there's also portal fiction that is also LitRPG, where people are just transported to a magical fantasy or science fiction world where there are RPG mechanics, and I would say that's another 30-ish%.
So I have essentially what is a series of one of each. So I have, I find that it is completely feasible and very doable, and people very much like it. It very much depends on, of course, how you write it and how you present it. So the times that I have seen like the tabletop version where like someone is doing something and they kind of hear a clatter of dice in the distance, some of that is some of the most popular series in the genre. So definitely explore that if that's something you want to do.
I would say the same thing. I think that the vast majority tend to lean toward video games. But again, because it's what Ramon said, most writers, when they're getting into it, especially if they're newer writers, it makes the most intuitive sense, like, oh, video game mechanics, how do you achieve that by putting them in a video game? But I think that because there's sort of a deluge of LitRPG books coming out that sort of follow that premise, that readers might be looking for something that's new and interesting and doesn't follow those tropes. So if you could come up with a good reason for video game mechanics to exist in a D&D format or any other transported to another world format, that might be a good way to go as well, because it's sort of new and fresh and there's not as much of it out there.
I don't have too much to add, but NPCs, the book, it's called NPCs by Drew Hayes.
Also excellent.
It's one of my favorite books, and that's based on a tabletop adventure.
Robert Bevan's Caravans and Creed, which is humorous LitRPG sort of, is a tabletop transport to a tabletop world.
Then just another follow-up question. I know you guys talked about, the question was asked about taking your books and then converting and creating a game out of it. What about the opposite? If you've already created a role-playing game, do you think that launching a LitRPG to sort of market that would be a good idea or not?
I mean, it's all worth the time. I mean, it's all up to you. You know, do you think that your time investment would be good? So if your tabletop game is already doing very well, you're making good sales, maybe stay in that lane and focus more on that. If you're seeing it as a way to kind of mutually market, that could be a great way to do that. You know, you can have like American Dolls has books about the dolls. So there is ways to make that happen. They wouldn't be doing that if there wasn't money in it. So the potential is there.
Perfect.
All right, so I think that's a wrap. I think we're on time and finished everything. Thank you very much to everyone who was here. Ramon and Matt came on this panel at extremely short notice, so thank you very much.